All right, hi, my name is Morgan Pesnell, and I'm here today to discuss Bell Hooks' Teaching Critical Thinking Practical Wisdom. I'm going to start off by saying this was for sure not a book I would have picked up off the shelf at a bookstore. I definitely thought when I first got this book that it was going to be very, very boring and that I was not going to like it. I had to review this book for my critical thinking class. We had a choice between three different books, and I picked this one because I thought it was going to be the biggest challenge for me. So I'm going to start off my conversation in review by discussing a couple chapters that I really, really, really liked and agreed with. So each chapter in this book was a different teaching that Bell Hooks wanted to get across for us that is important for critical thinking. So there is 32 of them, and out of the 32, I agreed with about 29 of them. So I'm gonna start off with the ones that I agreed with. So the first teaching I want to talk about that I really liked was teaching 6 in this book, and it was titled Purpose. In this chapter, Hooks talks about how it's very important for teachers to have a direct motive when they're teaching, and I for sure agree with that. Students, when they have a teacher that doesn't have a direct motive, they get really lazy and they don't want to listen anymore, and they lose all their desire to learn. And Hooks addressed how teachers all kind of need to come together and focus more on what they're actually teaching so students can start to critically think about these things, because if students have no interest, they're definitely not going to think in depth about anything. So overall, I really like that message because a lot of my professors, when I'm sitting in class, when you get lost, you're not interested anymore and you don't want to learn. So the next chapter that I want to talk about is chapter 13, and it's titled Humor in the Classroom. And in this chapter, Hooks discusses about how there needs to be humor brought in the classroom to create a community bond. On page 75, she says, all teachers could use more studies about how sharing the power of humor as a force in the classroom that enhances learning and helps to create and sustain bonds of community. I'm a true believer that laughter can bring people together, and Bell Hooks really discusses that in this chapter, how it's a lot easier to be in a class and discuss any topic if you kind of know each other and are able to make jokes out of everything instead of being like in fear constantly that others are judging you. Humor is definitely a way to like connect students to make it so they don't feel like they're being judged all the time. The next teaching that I really liked in this book was teaching 22, and it was titled The Joys of Reading. And this really hit home because when I was younger, I really enjoyed reading, and a lot of people thought I was really weird because of it. But Hooks discusses about how her teachers when she was younger really got her into reading, which really is what actually got her into critical thinking. She also talks about how a lot of students aren't actually interested in what they're learning when they have to read, so the reading isn't actually meaningful to them. So she says in her classes she gives like short readings instead of novels, so like just to get to the direct point, so that way everything the students read is actually meaningful and it'll make them more interested because it's not like busy work, which I for sure agree with, because in college you get a lot of that, just here's throw a novel at you, read the whole thing, write a paper, which Bell Hooks obviously does not agree that helps critical thinking whatsoever. So that is the last chapter that I really resonated with me, and that was definitely probably my favorite one out of the entire book. Next, I'm going to talk about a couple of the chapters that I really did not like. While this book was like a great book, there was a couple chapters I for sure could have done without. The entire book, I said there was about 3 teachings that I did not agree with, and these teachings included teaching 21, teaching 25, and teaching 26. I'm going to start off by talking about teaching 21, which was titled Self-Esteem. And it talks about how having low self-esteem can negatively affect your education. I don't believe this to be true at all. Students that have low self-esteem may not speak out in class, but that does not mean because you don't speak out in class that you're not intelligent or that you have the capability to critically think. I definitely feel this on a personal level because in class it's very hard for me to speak out, but as long as you actively listen in class, I feel like you can succeed. So when I read this chapter, I was actually kind of personally offended And I definitely felt like she was wrong in the correlation that self-esteem issues lead to education issues, because students can definitely sit there in class and not talk and be shy and do completely well on papers, tests, and other materials as long as you're listening. So I definitely felt like this chapter was not an aspect of critical thinking that Hooks was correct about. The next teaching that I want to talk about was teaching 25, which was the teaching about spirituality. Hooks debated in this chapter that spirituality needs to be brought into the classroom. I know religion and spirituality are not the same thing, but I believe neither of them should be brought into the classroom setting. I believe it makes many students very uncomfortable and actually less likely to share, because if you're not spiritual or you're not religious, it could make you feel very left out of the conversation. So when I read this chapter, I felt like this was like, I understand it's not religion, but just because something isn't about religion doesn't mean it can still be brought up in the classroom. Lastly, I want to talk about teaching 26, which was titled Touch. When I first read the title of the teaching, I was very taken aback, because touch in the classroom obviously isn't something you really think about day to day, but the chapter was more about student-teacher relationships. And Hooks says in this on page 153, before words are spoken in the classroom, we come together as bodies. I believe this statement's true, but I feel like as bodies, it's more important for body language and about how you approach a person more than physical touch. I know I've had a lot of close teachers over the years that I loved and had personal relationships with, but I'd still feel very uncomfortable with any of them touching me in any sort of way, even a hug, a hand touch. I just don't believe it's appropriate, whether it be from grade school all the way up to professors. I definitely just thought this chapter had nothing to do with critical thinking. I mean, I know student-teacher relationships are very important, but the touch aspect is not needed. So overall, this book I really like. Give this book a solid 9 out of 10, since I did say earlier that I did enjoy about 29 out of the 32 chapters, and I discussed the 3 that I really was not feeling. I definitely recommend this for future students, because I didn't think I was gonna like this book, and I actually learned so many things from it. And I would for sure recommend it for future critical thinking classes, because it definitely has a lot of aspects that you wouldn't even have thought about. Even after taking the class, there was a lot of things that I was like, wow, that's really relevant, and you can even connect it back to what you learned in the past semester. So I definitely think Hooks, Teaching Critical Thinking, Practical Wisdom, opened up my mind to ideas that I wasn't aware before, and I definitely think it's a valuable book to enhance students' knowledge on critical thinking and to open them up to new ideas.